Guys, welcome back on my channel. Today I'm going to make a useful group node you can use to manage and animate in an easy way a vector value from 0 to 1, diffusing it on a set of points, edges, faces, curves, control points and instances. After the explanation, I'm going to show you some practical cases on which you can easily use this group node. Let's get started. Now I'm working with Blender version 4.0.2, and to understand the concept behind this project, I'm going to use a simple mesh line with 11 points from 0 to 10, and imagine that you want to offset these points from 0 5 units up. How do you make it? It's simple. You add a geometry node modifier, going up to the plus button, General Geometry Nodes, and clicking the new button. Now, you usually add a set position. For this, link the offset in a combine XYZ and move the Z axis up, okay, like this. But I don't want to move these points all together at the same time. I want to distribute the offsetting, shifting this offset a little bit between the points. And to do this, I need to create a vector from 0 to 1 to move the points, and then change some attributes inside. So I can link these to a multiply value, leave this value to 5, because I want to move these points by 5 units in this example. And then I can use a map range. I can link this result here in the multiply, and as you can see, I can just move this slide up and down to get 0 and 1. But I want to modify, to set an initial from min and from max in a different way with a different numbers for each point of this mesh line. How? So you can see I have 11 points. If I want to move this point up and then after a little delay move this point, and after another delay of the same value move the third point, etc. If I want to use this map range, I need to use a range from 0 to 1 to create my animation. And to do this, I need to remap, as I mentioned before, these indexes in a range from 0 to 1. And to do this, I need to get the index of each point, divide by what the number of total points, thanks to this domain size node, the total point of this mesh, subtracting 1, because this number gives me the total number of indexes, so 11 and not 10. So I need to subtract 1 and use this result here in the divide operation. So 0 divided by 10 is 0, 5 divided by 10 is 0.5, and 10 divided by 10 is 1. And I have here the range from 0 to 1 of indexes. Now that I have these, I can link this in the from min, and you can see I have already written these numbers here, 0, 0.1, 0.2, etc. And now if I take this value and add a single step between these 2 points, so 0.1, you can see, if I add 0.1 and link this to the max and increase this value, you can see the points are starting to shift, to offset from the original position to the final position. But there is a problem. I have this problem here. If I set 0.1, you can see I have 0.1 and 0.2 here, because I added 0.1 to each of these values to create the from max. And if I set 0.1 in this map range, I have the maximum value of the first point. So the first point goes to the final position, and 0.1 as the from min of the second index, and because the value is equal to the from min, I don't have shifting to the second index. Now if I increase a little bit this and go to 0.2, you can see the same behavior between the second and the third. So if I increase this value, what happens? You can see if I increase this value, I increase the delay from one to the next point to start the shifting. If I set the 0.2 in this add, I don't have this number here, so I have a 0.2, 0.3 and 0.4, and for this reason the first point is in the final position, because 0.2 as the value is equal to the from max value. for the second point, 0.2 is in the middle between the from min and from max, and the position of the second is exactly in the half of the entire offset that I need, so here. And for the third point, 0.2 is the exact value of the from min, so the point remains at the original position. So if I want to transform this line here in a line like this, so I want to have the first point here in the final position and the last point still here, I have to add here 1. This way you can see if I increase this value, I have the increasing a little bit until the value of 1, okay? But there is a problem, because to get all the points in the final position, I need to increase a lot this value, and I need to increase from 1 to what value? Exact 2. Why 2? Because if I set here the value I mentioned before, but with 1 in this add, I have here these values. As you can see, I have 0 plus 1 equal 1, 0.1 plus 1 equal 1.1, etc. And as you can see, for the first point, if I set 1, I get only the final position for the first index, because 1 is the value of the from max, but not for the next and the next. And as you can see, this value is inside this range and it's not equal to the final value. And you can see for the last point, the from min is 1 and from max is 2, exactly the double value. So this means that if I want to move all these points from this position to this position, this value needs to be a range from 0 to 2. And this means that if I go here and add an input attribute like a factor, subtype factor from 0 to 1 as a single value, I need to take this factor and multiply by 2. And next link these in the value, because in this way, if I set, for example, 0.5, you can see I have a 0.5 that is multiplied by 2, and 0.5 multiplied by 2 is 1. And 1 is exactly the same value of the from max of the first index, and the decreasing of the values until the end, where I have 0.5, but 0.5 multiplied by 2 is 1. That is the exact value of the from min of the last point. And from this point of the factor and more, I will have an increasing of the shifting of this index here, because above this value, so if I set 0.75, for example, what I have is 0.75 multiplied by 2 is equal to 1.5, and 1.5 is in the middle of this range from 1 and 2, and you can see the correct position of the final index. If I set 2, I have the correct shifting of the last point to the final position. And this is the easiest way to create a factor, a distributed factor from 0 to 1, and you can animate this value or manage it using a float curve. So if I move these nodes here and link this in a float curve and link this here, I can manipulate the shape of this smoothing factor like this, for example, or with a sine operation like this, okay, and so on. Now let's create the group node of this factor diffuser. So to do this, I need to take all these nodes and press Ctrl G. It's not finished because I want to create a way to have the same behavior, but for the points of a mesh, edges context, faces context, and other domains. So to do this, I need to take this geometry and domain size and duplicate these a few times, because in this case, Ctrl H, I want the point counts. But to distinguish the different domain, I need to add another input attribute. In this case, the value is the factor, and this is the choice of the domain. So we can set point, edges, faces, point of the curve, curves, and instances. So I have here an integer number from 1 to 6, a single value. And now I can ask me if this value is equal to 1. I want to work in a point domain of a mesh. So I can link these in a switch. I can set here the integer because I need always the total amount of indexes of my domain. Link this output here in the subtract. In this case, I can link this result here, the point in the true value. And if I have a false, I need to duplicate all these 3 nodes another time, another time, another time, and another time. Set the correct number here for 5 and 6. Link the same geometry to all these domain. Change the correct domain. So if I have 2, I want always the mesh, but not the point, but the edges or the faces. And why not? We can also add the case of the face corner. So we can choose here the face corner, and here we have 7 group, 7 here, and here we have point, edge, faces, face corner, point, curve, curves, and instances. The maximum is 7. I can change these in a curve because in this case I want the point, and in this case I don't want the point but the spline count, and I show you why with a practical case about this. And in this case the number of instances, so the instances count. I need to link this geometry here, link the same value of the choice with alt and right drag here. Perfect. Now for the switch, if I have 1, I want this result, so the point count of the mesh. Otherwise I want not false but the result of the next switch, because if I have 2, I want the edges count, and if it is not, I want the output of the next switch, and so on. I link all these switches like this, and for the final result, for the instances, I cannot have a value more than 7, because I have the minimum and maximum initialized here in the definition of the input attributes. And now that I have this result here, the group node is finished. Now I can jump over with the tab, and in this example I can set 1 because I want the point, and the default value, I forgot the default value to 1. Okay, it's important. Now that I have this behavior, you can see if I increase this factor, I have the correct behavior here. And if I increase the number of these points, I always have the same behavior of this factor attribute. Now let's see practical cases about it. You can see in this file I have another object here called examples that you can find in my file if you downloaded this from my Gumroad page. I hide for a moment this plane and show these examples. I delete all these annotations. I want to show you 5 cases. So the first is this. I have a simple text string curve like this, happy birthday, then a fill curve to have a mesh inside. Then I use a rotate instances because these objects are instances, as you can see in the spreadsheet, and I want to rotate each instance with the value of the rotation based by this map range, where 0 equals 0 rotation and 1 equal pi divided by 2, so 90 degrees in this direction here. Okay, and I want to animate these. For all these cases I used the same new attribute input in this new geometry node workflow. As you can see, animation from 0 to 1. I used this new group node we created before that I renamed in factor diffuser. As you can see, I linked the text inside this node and linked the animation of the input attributes, and link the factor inside a float curve here and then inside the map range. So to have a correct result, I need to set here what value: point, no, edges, faces, now instances. So 7, because I have here instances. and I want to use their indexes. Now if I want to see the result, as you can see, I just increase this value, and if I increase this value, you can see the correct rotation of each letter of the text from 0 to 90 degrees, following this shape. If I mute these, I have a linear animation, and in the spreadsheet we have the anim factor, that is the output of this result here, saved in this attribute, because I want to also use these values in the material of the text, because I want to have an alpha, a different alpha from 0 to 1, a different emission from 0 to 1 for each letter. And if I set 0, I don't want to see any of these letters. If I set 1, I want to see all the letters. And to do this, I stored this value for each instance inside this anim factor. And if I press this button to see the viewport preview, you see nothing. And if I increase this animation, you can see the letters appear. And all this with one single attribute. If I change the number of the letters, so hi, I'm Andrea, the behavior doesn't change. You can easily change this text without issues. Now let's enable this float curve to have a more smoothed animation. And if I go in the shading editor and select the socket of the text, you can see I easily get the animation factor for each instance and link this factor to the alpha and to the strength of this material. Keep in mind, to have this correct behavior, you need to go to, with Eevee, to go to the material properties, go down and set for the blend mode alpha hashed or alpha blend if you want. Otherwise, you can't have the correct behavior of the alpha, okay, the transparent of the alpha socket. Next example, case with mesh points. I'm going to link this output to the geometry output, and if I set the 0, you can see I have a simple cylinder, as you can see in the workflow of the geometry nodes. Then I link the same geometry in the factor diffuser. I'm working with 1, the value of the points, because I want to move all the points of the vertices as the definition of the concept from a position to another position. And this case is equal to the definition of the concept at the starting point of this video. And as you can see, if I increase the animation, you can see the vertices start to go to the last position and then the other, like this. And you can manipulate and play with this value as you want. Another case with curve points. So this is funny. I link these result in the geometry output, and this is a similar case but with a difference. As you can see, I have a curve circle, not cyclic. Here I need to set what value, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because I want the points of the curve. And now if I increase the animation, you can see this particular effect. And why this happens? Because I have here in the output of this factor a multiply to have a shifting in the z direction of this combined xyz. But in the meantime, I have a float curve that shifts the position to change the factor from 0 to 1 linearly, passing through the value 1 and returning to the value of 0, while I'm managing the value of the factor from 0 to 1. Now, where is the issue here in this workflow? Anyone can see it? The problem is this. As you can see, I have this float curve that goes from 0 to 1, okay, but before I have a multiply mathematical operation, and having this math node before the float curve, I lose this 5 value here of the multiplication. So if I want to have these, you need to switch these two nodes and link the factor here in the value and this result here in the multiply, and then these to the z. In this way you can have the correct multiplication factor by 5 like this, okay? Otherwise you don't have 5 because you have the result of these remapping values node, and you can see it from the spreadsheet, okay? here 5, and then the decreasing of these points. Now if I mute these, I have the result as before, so I can have the correct behavior. Where you need to use this multiply or a dividing operation before the float curve. If you want to shrink or extend the result of this effect of the factor diffuser, I switch again this multiply before, I enable it, but setting 1. And as you can see, I have this behavior. But if I want to shrink this result of this shape, I can manipulate this factor curve, yes, but you can increase this multiply to shrink this result like this. But keep in mind, doing this, if you increase the animation, you would have the final result before 1 in the input attribute. As you can see, I have the final animation here near 0.6, and this is because I multiply this result of the factor. If you divide this factor by a number, you get the opposite, but keep in mind, doing this, if you go to 1, you can't get the final animation of your points because you stretch it too much, this effect, and you don't have enough space or range numbers to have the animation you want. So keep in mind this concept. This is very funny. How can I make the shader? It's very simple. I transform this curve with a curve to mesh linking the curve circle and saving the factor with a capture attribute to create the correct UV to use in the shading editor. So I saved the factor of the base and the profile curve in a combined XYZ for the X and Y of the UV map, save these in a UV attribute, and next to the shading editor slot of the checker, this is the workflow, get the attribute of the UV and link this vector in a checker texture and then in a principal BSDF. Nothing hard, nothing complicated. Going in the geometry nodes, example number 4, I linked the result in the group output, and in this case we have a grid, a simple grid like this, Shift Z to see the wireframe in an easy way. Then I have the split edges, and you can see the vector viewer with the Shift and Control pressed. Then I scaled the elements based by the factor of my factor diffuser and setting here 3 because I want to work in a face domain. So for each face I want to scale the elements. In fact, if I increase this animation attribute and press Shift Z, you can see the correct rescaling of all these faces here. And take a look, in this case I don't have a single row with the same scale, okay, because I'm working with the index of each face. So if you look in detail, if I set 0 and increase a little bit these, you can see the correct increasing of the faces based by the index. But because I have lots of faces, the effect is hard to see if I increase in this way the object. And not only this, I wanted to add a set position and a set material. So if I have 0, I want to have a random rotation of the original face. And for this, you can see the set position, a mix node to mix two different positions. So the current position, so the final position, that is this, and an initial position, that is the final position, rotated by a random value. And for all the indexes of the same face, so the same island index, I want the same random value to keep the same rotation from the center of the position of the face. And in this way I can get the position of the face used as the center and rotate all the 4 vertices around the center of the face by the same random value here. In fact, if I mute for a moment the scale element and set the animation to 0, you can see the random rotation of all these faces from the center of each face. And if I increase the animation, you can see all the points start to go to the final position, so the initial and correct position. of the mesh, unmute this scale, then I used the island index, so each face. For example, I could use the index evaluated in the face domain. It's the same, passing through this white noise to get a value, a random value from 0 to 1 based by this unique index island. Save this in the store name attribute as a color, set the material, and I have this particular effect in the shading editor. You can see the slot of the metal, and this is the factor. I get the factor of this color attribute passing through this color ramp. I can link this factor, it's the same, and this in the principal BSDF where I have full metallic object, and this is the final result of this case. Last case, a meter for sound effect or whatever. I link these and you can see this particular object. I created here a vertical curve line, resample curve to have more than 2 control points, the start and the end. Then I stored the factor for each point of this vertical line because I need to use this factor in the shading editor to pass this value from 0 to 1 in a color ramp, in a rainbow color ramp. Then I instantiated an horizontal curve line and rescaling them by this float value of the factor, and this is the result. As you can see, realized instance, because I don't want to have instances but splines, and because I want to use a trim curve, and the trim curve works on splines and not instances. So I wanted to manage the end of this trim curve based by our new factor diffuser. I need here to set 6 because I want to work with the curves 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and for each curve I want to use this new factor. And in this way, if I set the 0 for the animation, I don't have anything. I need to press Shift, Control and click here on the set material because I have the viewer here. Okay, I can drop it, and in this way I can create from curve a mesh using a curve circle with a resolution setting after the material of the meter. And now if I increase the animation, you can see, if I enable the preview, you can see the animation of the meter, okay, using a delay based by these factor diffuser. And you can use this technique if you want to import a sound file and use the curve of that frequency as the input factor of this factor diffuser and not using it manually. And this was the example number 5. If you want to use this factor diffuser group node as an asset in your project, it's very easy to do. You can easily click with the right button on the name of the factor diffuser group node and click mark as an asset, and make sure to have the project in which there is this group node inside your path of assets in the preferences of Blender. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you like it. I hope you will use this group node in your project. You can find this group node and the examples in my file that you can download from my Gumroad page. If you like my work, please subscribe to my channel and see you to the next tutorial. Bye!